Hi, everyone. I'm David Lipton from The Reckoning, July 4th, 2030. Welcome to our fifth in a series of weekly podcasts. This episode is about changing our minds and our political behavior. You're probably asking yourself, why should I want to do that? I'm just fine the way I am. Well, sometimes humor is the best way to approach a serious problem. To get the ball rolling and loosen things up, I ask you to look at this cartoon of a couple that is breaking up. One is a square head and one is a round head. Can we keep rolling along pretending there are no squares, also known as stubborn facts, in our way? Apparently we've been doing just fine for the last century or more. Half century or more. What a pleasant joyride for us it has been. The previous podcast showed that politically speaking, we are mostly Democrats or Republicans, around 80-85%. It's just one of those stubborn facts of our political life. If surveys over the years are accepted, we also think of ourselves as conservatives, liberals/progressives, roughly 80%,
with fewer voters identifying as far left or far right.
Probably somewhere around 10% each, but we don't really know.
Stay with me on this. What has all this got to do with the change of political vision? How is it related to the way I vote? Well, political visions are deeply ingrained in us. They are not easily changed.
Breaking up is hard to do, be they long-standing relationships or deeply held beliefs. That is good news, and it's also bad news. The good news is that political stability is maintained for long periods of time. The bad news is that political paralysis can set in, and like personal relationships, can lock people into situations they tolerate, but also stunts their personal growth. This is what is happening in our time. If everyone is satisfied with the status quo, well, I guess there's no problem. Newsflash, fewer and fewer of us are satisfied. There are major problems all around us, and we are approaching a tipping point. It's time to look out the window or browse the internet. Look at our city streets filled with more homeless people, the open border to the south, the political acrimony and vindictiveness dominating our public space, and finally, look at the turbulent and violent atmosphere in our universities. A major rethink of how we relate to our government may be long overdue. Breaking up with old ideas is tough, but necessary. Changing the way we think about things is easier said than done. We'll give it a try. I call it our rendezvous with destiny, the meeting of the boomer and millennial generations, the former who has it all, and the latter that will have a good deal less.
That is the reason why it is necessary to change.
Now that we've had our good laugh, I suggest that we use an imaginary dialogue between a boomer and a millennial as a way to start our rethinking how we arrange our affairs between ourselves and our government. Boomer, imagine a circle and draw a line dividing it equally in half from top to bottom. Label one side government policies and actions, and the other side individual activities. Think of that circle as the full range of activities possible at any time. Millennial, okay, that seems clear enough. Boomer, in your mind's eye, move the center line in one direction or the other. As the sphere of government increases, the sphere left to the individual decreases. The reverse is also true. Obviously, the circle or sphere of total activities will expand or contract over time. But for a specific time, there is a limit to the range of situations and options that are available. The give and take between government and individuals always involves trade-offs. What one side gains in freedom of action, the other side, well, loses. Often both sides lose, but in different ways and in different times. Millennial, what you're saying sounds really important, but it's hard to follow. Can you get more concrete? Why not focus on a specific concern, say student loans for college? Boomer, that's an excellent idea. Let's start with some stubborn facts. Total student loan debt in the United States is about 1.7 trillion. That's with a T. The federal loan balance accounts for about 93% of all student loan debt. There are about 43 million borrowers. Average student loan debt runs around 38,000, give or take a few $100. Slightly more than half of the borrowers owe 20,000 or less. That's a lot of money for people who are just starting out. Millennial. We all know that most of those borrowers will never pay back the loans, or will do so over a very, very long time. That's why the federal government wants to, quote, help, end of quote, by either forgiving the interest on the loan or writing part of that off. That sounds like a nice thing to do. True, it is a nice thing to do, but who benefits and who pays for the remedy and for how long? Is government action imposed by presidential decree really a sustainable, permanent solution? Is it even democratic in the larger sense? Or is it authoritarian and dictatorial? Let's leave the dialogue here and ask ourselves, what is the unspoken assumption supporting the entire policy of student loans? Now, let's speak plainly. It is the idea that social justice and fairness requires government action to get the desired results. Please keep that in mind. That's a ground wellspring assumption underlying all government behavior. In the case of government loans to students, it's a worthy goal to get people to get a better chance for a higher education. Justice and fairness are taken, or assumed, to mean equal access to education, health care, old age pension benefits, guaranteed minimum income levels, and so forth. Under this assumption, individual choices give way to the demands for equality, often understood as the greater good. The only way to accomplish the greater good is to have the government adopt a one-size-fits-all approach. In all self-righteousness, the government determines, sets policies and prices, then imposes them on private parties. Isn't that simple and fair? Think back to the early imagery of the dialogue and that circle where the center line shifted back and forth. The federal government enabled individuals to spend more time getting educated. It happened. More people went to universities and colleges, and that happened because the government subsidized the activity through loans. Wonderful. But we now realize that many of those students will default on their loans, and they are handicapped with very poor employment prospects. Result? The government expanded its intrusion into people's lives with the unintended consequences of their having their lifestyle options greatly diminished. Worse, the government borrowed that money itself from the future by consistently using deficit financing. Why not? We've been doing it for the last half century. Who are the winners and the losers? The winners are the following. The federal government, because it did, quote, the right thing. University faculty and administrators, because those loans enable them to charge higher tuition and greatly expand their operations. The politician who used the system to buy votes is also a winner, because he can say, or she can say, look what I did for you. The losers are the students, because they were sent on a fool's errand of getting an education that led, for many of them, nowhere. The biggest losers of all are the future taxpayers who will be stuck with the increased debt load of the U.S. government. Think well on the point. Not only are our pockets being picked, so are the pockets of unborn Americans. All these results are euphemistically called, quote, kicking the can down the road. Well, nice, good job. Not really. Let's go back to the question at the beginning of this episode. How does a change of political vision happen? First answer is by accepting the stubborn fact of repeated and continuous policy failures, and that we are not really kicking the can down the road. We're piling up huge boulders that will undermine the future prosperity of our country. Second answer, a change in assumptions will lead to a change in behavior. Sure, that's easy. You think? Maybe. Third answer, well, maybe not. Perhaps the tyranny of the status quo, that is keeping all the spending programs in place and increasing them by the rate of inflation, will override all other considerations. We will be unable to overcome our collective national vice of overspending. Well, it's time to go. You will hear from me, David Lipton, in a week's time when we reflect on how confirmation bias keeps us running in place as well as guaranteeing our continued overspending. You can access my ideas and thoughts by visiting Amazon.com and search for The Reckoning, July 4th, 2020.